May 19, 1944. The small village of Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray, Normandy, France. The evening air carried a peculiar stillness, broken only by the distant rumble of aircraft engines. Lieutenant Thomas Harrington of the United States Army Air Forces peered through his binoculars at the village below, noting the smoke rising from chimneys and the occasional movement of civilians. His reconnaissance mission was nearly complete, and he was eager to return to base. Little did he know that within 24 hours, a chance encounter would transform not only his war experience, but the lives of an entire community. He believed his most significant contribution to the war effort would be his tactical intelligence reports. How profoundly wrong he would be. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable account of how a desperate plea from a starving French mother led to one American pilot creating an unprecedented humanitarian operation that would challenge military protocol and reveal how compassion could flourish even in warfare's darkest corners. The year 1944 marked a turning point in the European theatre of operations. Allied forces were preparing for the massive invasion of Normandy, while occupied France suffered under increasingly harsh conditions. As German forces anticipated the Allied assault, they tightened their grip on French civilians, requisitioning food and supplies at an alarming rate. In the rural areas surrounding Normandy, the situation had become particularly dire. 4 years of occupation had stripped local farms of livestock, grain reserves were depleted, and strict rationing left many facing starvation. The village of Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray had been especially affected due to its location along a major supply route. German authorities prioritized military needs, leaving civilians to subsist on increasingly meager rations. Marie Laurent, a 32-year-old widow and mother of 3 young children, had watched with growing desperation as her family's food supplies dwindled to nearly nothing. Her husband Pierre, a member of the French resistance, had disappeared 18 months earlier during a mission to sabotage a German supply train. Though she maintained hope for his return, the practical realities of survival consumed her daily life. That morning, Marie had risen before dawn to queue for bread rations. After 4 hours of waiting, she received only 200 grams of coarse bread made mostly from sawdust, barely enough for one meal for her family. Her children, Emily, age 8, Louis, age 6, and Claudette, just 4 years old, had grown thin and listless. Little Claudette had developed a persistent cough that worried Marie constantly. "We cannot continue like this," Marie confided to her neighbor, Madame Benoit, as they walked home with their meager rations. "The children grow weaker each day. I must find another way." Madame Benoit glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Be careful what you say, Marie. The walls have ears. Remember what happened to the Moreau family when they complained too loudly." Marie nodded solemnly. The Moreau family had been taken away 3 weeks earlier after Monsieur Moreau had argued with a German officer over ration allocations. No one had heard from them since. Across the English Channel at RAF Thorney Island in Hampshire, Lieutenant Thomas Harrington was preparing for a reconnaissance mission over Normandy. At 27 years old, Harrington was considered one of the most skilled pilots in his squadron. Flying a modified P-51 Mustang equipped with specialized cameras, his task was to photograph German defensive positions along the coast and inland areas where resistance activity had been reported. "Weather conditions are optimal today, Lieutenant," Major Williams informed him during the pre-flight briefing. "Cloud cover at 4,000 feet should provide decent concealment. Your primary objective is Sector 47, with special attention to coastal battery placements." "Yes, sir," Harrington replied, studying the map before him. "Any specific intelligence requests from our French allies?" "Actually, yes," Williams said, lowering his voice slightly. "We've received reports of increased food confiscation in several villages in this area." He circled a region about 20 kilometers inland from the coast. "The resistance networks are concerned about civilian starvation. If you spot any agricultural stockpiles or unusual transport activity, make note of it." Harrington nodded. The humanitarian situation in occupied France was deteriorating rapidly, according to intelligence reports. Though his primary mission was military in nature, the plight of French civilians was never far from his mind. His own grandmother had been French, emigrating to America as a young woman. He'd grown up hearing her stories of the beautiful Norman countryside and its resilient people. As Harrington climbed into his aircraft, he performed his usual ritual, touching the silver medallion of St. Christopher his grandmother had given him before her passing. "Protégez-moi," he whispered in rusty French. "Protect me." The flight across the Channel was uneventful, but as soon as Harrington crossed into French airspace, the tension mounted. German anti-aircraft batteries were increasingly active, and Luftwaffe patrols had been strengthened in anticipation of Allied air operations preceding the invasion. Harrington flew at 3,000 feet, occasionally dipping lower to photograph specific targets. His route took him inland, following the Seine River toward Rouen before banking south toward the designated reconnaissance area. As he approached Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray, he noticed unusual activity at a farm compound on the village outskirts. "Echo Base, this is Mockingbird," he radioed. "I'm observing what appears to be a significant food storage facility at coordinates 49-37. Multiple trucks being loaded, possible German supply depot." "Copy that, Mockingbird. Get photographs if you can, but maintain your primary flight path." Harrington dipped the Mustang slightly, activating the camera system to capture the scene below. As he completed the pass, something unexpected occurred. His engine sputtered briefly, causing a momentary loss of altitude. The aircraft recovered quickly, but a warning light illuminated on his instrument panel. "Echo Base, Mockingbird here. I'm experiencing some engine irregularity. Nothing critical, but I may need to reduce altitude to maintain performance." "Understood, Mockingbird. Use your judgment. Primary objectives have been accomplished. You are cleared to return if necessary." Harrington checked his fuel gauges and oil pressure. Everything seemed stable, but the warning light concerned him. Rather than risk a channel crossing with a potentially failing engine, he decided to find a suitable field for emergency landing, assess the problem, and, if possible, complete repairs before continuing. He reduced altitude to 1,000 feet, scanning the countryside for a suitable landing site. About 3 kilometers south of Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray, he spotted what appeared to be an abandoned farm field with sufficient length for his aircraft. As he circled to assess the approach, he noticed something unusual: a woman standing in the middle of the field, waving frantically at his aircraft. This was not uncommon. French civilians often expressed their support for Allied aircraft, though such demonstrations could bring severe punishment if German patrols observed them. What made this situation different was the woman's persistence, and the fact that she appeared to be deliberately positioning herself in what would be his landing path if he chose that field. Military protocol was clear: avoid all contact with civilians during operations, unless directly related to resistance activities coordinated through official channels. Yet something about the woman's desperate signaling compelled Harrington to circle once more. As he passed lower over the field, he could see her more clearly, thin to the point of emaciation, clutching what appeared to be a small child to her chest. "Echo Base, this is Mockingbird. I'm observing civilian distress signals at my potential landing coordinates. Appear to be non-threatening. Request guidance." After a brief silence, the radio crackled. "Mockingbird, maintain mission parameters. Avoid civilian contact. Find alternate landing site if necessary." Harrington acknowledged the order, but as he began to bank away, the engine sputtered again, this time more severely. The aircraft shuddered, losing altitude rapidly before the engine caught again. The warning light now flashed insistently. "Echo Base, engine situation degrading. I need to land immediately, taking the field at current position." "Copy that, Mockingbird. Proceed with caution. Resistance contacts will be alerted to your position." Harrington circled one final time, setting up his approach. The woman had moved to the edge of the field but continued to wave. He focused on his landing, bringing the Mustang down smoothly despite the engine's intermittent power. The aircraft rolled to a stop near a copse of trees that would provide some concealment from road traffic. As soon as the propeller stopped turning, Harrington quickly assessed his situation. He was in hostile territory with a damaged aircraft. Standard procedure called for him to either repair the plane quickly or destroy it and seek extraction through resistance networks. Civilian contact was to be minimized. Yet before he could even exit the cockpit, the woman was running toward him across the field, still clutching the child. Against all protocol, Harrington found himself climbing down to meet her. Marie-Laurent had been gathering wild greens at the field's edge when she heard the aircraft. Unlike the threatening rumble of German planes, this one had the distinctive sound of an American engine, a sound she had come to recognize from previous Allied reconnaissance flights. When she saw the aircraft circling and appearing to have trouble, an idea formed instantly in her desperate mind. "Monsieur, monsieur," she called as Harrington removed his flight helmet. "American, yes, you are American?" Harrington nodded cautiously. "Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Thomas Harrington, United States Army Air Forces. I need to repair my aircraft and leave quickly. It is not safe for either of us." "Please," Marie said, her English halting but understandable. "My children, they starve. The Germans take all food. My little one, she is very sick." She pulled back the blanket to reveal Claudette's face, gaunt and pale, her breathing labored. Harrington felt his throat tighten. The child reminded him of his young niece back home in Pennsylvania. "I'm sorry, madame, but I cannot—" "Please," Marie interrupted, her eyes filling with tears. "Just small food, anything. Then I help you hide plane. I know safe place. My husband, he was resistance before they take him." Harrington glanced at his aircraft, then back at the desperate mother. Military regulations were explicit, but the humanitarian crisis before him was equally clear. He reached into his flight suit and pulled out his emergency ration kit, containing chocolate, preserved meat, crackers, and dried fruit. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hands. "It is not much, but—" Marie gasped, clutching the rations as if they were gold. "Merci, monsieur. Merci. This will help my children survive another day." Then her expression changed, becoming more determined. "But there are many children in village, many families with nothing. The Germans, they take everything yesterday for their soldiers." Harrington looked toward the road, then at the sky, acutely aware of the danger. "Madame, I wish I could help more, but I must repair my aircraft and leave before German patrols find us." Marie nodded quickly. Yes, I help. My brother is mechanic or was before war. I know some things. What is problem?" Despite his reservations, Harrington found himself explaining the issue, a fuel line problem that might be remedied with a simple field repair. To his surprise, Marie offered practical suggestions that reflected genuine mechanical knowledge. Working together, they identified the issue: a loose connection in the fuel delivery system. With Marie holding tools and providing an extra pair of hands, Harrington completed repairs that might have taken hours on his own. As they worked, Marie told him about the village's situation. "Last winter, 12 children died of hunger and cold. This winter will be worse. The Germans leave us nothing now. They know invasion comes, so they prepare. We are, how you say, dispensable." The repair complete, Harrington faced a decision. His official duty was clear: return to base immediately with his reconnaissance photographs. Yet the woman's words and the image of her starving child haunted him. "Madame," he said finally, "I will return to my base now, but I make you this promise. I will not forget what I have seen here today." Marie nodded, not understanding the full meaning of his words. "Thank you for the food, monsieur. God protect you on your journey." As Harrington prepared to depart, Marie suddenly grabbed his arm. "Wait. The Germans patrol this area every day at 1600 hours, 4 in afternoon. They will be here in 30 minutes. You must wait until they pass." This information presented a new problem. Taking off now might get him killed, but waiting increased the risk of discovery on the ground. "Is there somewhere I can conceal the aircraft until after the patrol passes?" he asked. Marie pointed to an abandoned barn about 500 meters away. "There. The roof is partly gone, but the walls still stand. The entrance is large enough, I think." Together they pushed the Mustang across the field and into the dilapidated structure, covering it with old hay and farming equipment. No sooner had they finished than the sound of vehicles reached them. "Quick!" Marie whispered, pulling him behind a stone wall. "They must not see you." A German patrol consisting of 2 vehicles passed slowly along the road bordering the field. The soldiers appeared alert but routine in their observation, scanning the countryside without particular interest. After they passed, Harrington and Marie waited an additional 20 minutes before returning to the aircraft. "It is safe now," she said. "They will not return until tomorrow." As Harrington prepared for takeoff, Marie made a final appeal. "Monsieur, If you ever fly this way again, remember our village. Remember our children." "I will, madam. You have my word." With that promise, Lieutenant Thomas Harrington returned to his aircraft, started the engine, and took off from the field, banking west toward the Channel and England beyond. The encounter had lasted less than 2 hours, but it had changed him profoundly. Upon returning to RAF Thorney Island, Harrington immediately reported to intelligence officers, providing detailed information about German defensive positions and troop movements observed during his flight. He deliberately omitted any mention of his interaction with Marie-Laurent, knowing that such unauthorized civilian contact could result in severe disciplinary action. After debriefing, he sought out his squadron commander, Major Williams, requesting a private conversation. "The situation for French civilians in the Normandy region is worse than our reports indicate, sir," Harrington explained. "While conducting my emergency repairs, I observed conditions of severe malnutrition, particularly among children. With the invasion preparations underway, German forces are confiscating nearly all available food supplies." Williams studied him carefully. "Lieutenant, did you have direct contact with French civilians during your mission?" Harrington met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I followed protocol to the extent possible while ensuring the security of my aircraft and mission objectives." Williams sighed, recognizing the non-answer. "Harrington, I understand your concern for the civilian population. We all share it. But our primary mission remains military in nature. Humanitarian concerns will be addressed after liberation. With respect, sir, many won't survive until liberation, especially the children." The Major leaned back in his chair. "What exactly are you proposing, Lieutenant?" "Operation Provision, sir. A supplemental humanitarian mission conducted in conjunction with our regular reconnaissance flights. Small packages of concentrated rations airdropped to predetermined locations near affected villages." Williams shook his head. "Absolutely out of the question. It would compromise operational security, potentially reveal flight patterns to enemy observers, and divert resources from critical military objectives." "Sir, I've given this considerable thought. The drops could be conducted at varying times and locations, disguised as standard reconnaissance runs. The psychological impact on the French population would be substantial, increasing resistance cooperation and demonstrating Allied commitment to civilian welfare. Minimal additional resources would be required." "And what about German reprisals against villagers found with Allied supplies?" Williams countered. "The packages could be designed to appear as French civilian items, sir. Nothing that would definitively link them to Allied forces." For several minutes, Williams said nothing, simply studying the younger officer. Finally, he spoke. "Write up a detailed proposal, Lieutenant. Include all operational parameters, resource requirements, and security protocols. I make no promises, but I'll forward it up the chain of command. Thank you, sir. And Harrington, this conversation never happened. If you encountered any French civilians during your emergency landing, that information is not to appear in any official report. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, sir." Over the next 48 hours, Lieutenant Harrington worked tirelessly on his proposal, incorporating intelligence data on civilian conditions, potential drop zones, and estimated resource requirements. He consulted discreetly with the Quartermaster Corps regarding available surplus rations and with intelligence officers about resistance networks that might facilitate distribution. Major Williams kept his word, forwarding the proposal through official channels. To Harrington's surprise, the response came swiftly, not the expected rejection, but qualified approval for a limited test operation, provided it did not interfere with primary military objectives. The initiative might have died there, relegated to a minor footnote in Allied operations, if not for an unexpected advocate. Air Commodore Charles Hamilton, liaison officer to the Free French Forces, had reviewed the proposal and recognized its potential strategic value beyond the humanitarian aspects. "Gentlemen," Hamilton addressed the Operational Planning Committee, "Lieutenant Harrington's proposal offers more than humanitarian relief. It provides an opportunity to strengthen civilian support networks critical to our post-invasion objectives. French citizens who survive the occupation with Allied assistance will be invaluable to stabilization efforts." With Hamilton's support, Operation Provision received provisional approval for 5 initial supply drops, to be evaluated for effectiveness and security before any expansion would be considered. Harrington was summoned to a classified briefing where the parameters were established. The operation would utilize modified supply containers that could be dropped from reconnaissance aircraft without requiring specialized equipment. Each container would hold concentrated rations sufficient to supplement 20 people for approximately 1 week, prioritizing children, pregnant women, and the elderly. Lieutenant, your personal involvement in this operation ends with the planning phase, Colonel Jenkins informed him. The actual drops will be conducted by regular reconnaissance crews as part of their standard missions. With respect, sir, Harrington responded, I request permission to fly the initial drop missions. My familiarity with the terrain and the specific needs of the communities will be valuable in establishing effective protocols. After considerable debate, permission was granted for Harrington to lead the first 3 drops, with strict orders to maintain complete operational security and avoid any direct civilian contact. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 23rd, just 4 days after his encounter with Marie Laurent, Lieutenant Harrington prepared for the first supply drop mission. The packages had been carefully prepared. Concentrated protein bars, powdered milk, multivitamins, and medical supplies, all packaged in nondescript containers that could pass as French civilian items if discovered by German patrols. Remember, Lieutenant, Major Williams cautioned during the final briefing, this is a proof-of-concept mission. The success or failure of these initial drops will determine whether the operation continues. Primary mission objectives take precedence at all times. Understood, sir. Harrington's flight path took him over the same region as his previous reconnaissance mission, but this time he carried something more valuable than cameras. As he approached the outskirts of Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray, he reduced altitude to 500 feet, low enough for accurate placement of the packages, but high enough to avoid drawing undue attention. The drop zone had been carefully selected, a wooded area approximately 1 kilometer from the village center, accessible but not easily observable from main roads. At precisely the designated coordinates, Harrington released the first package, watching as it descended by small parachute into the trees below. What he did not know, could not have known, was that Marie Laurent had organized a small group of trusted villagers to watch for Allied aircraft since his departure. When his distinctive Mustang appeared over the horizon, Marie dispatched 2 teenage boys to the woods, following a hunch that would prove remarkably accurate. Jean-Pierre Dumont, age 15, and Marcel Benoit, 14, were the first to discover the supply package nestled among the trees. Look at this, Jean-Pierre exclaimed, examining the container. American food. Real chocolate and, what is this? Powdered milk. We must get this to Madame Laurent immediately, Marcel replied, already understanding the significance of their discovery. The boys transported the package to Marie's small cottage at the village edge, using a route that avoided German checkpoints and the homes of known collaborators. Within an hour, Marie had assembled a small council of trusted community members to determine fair distribution. Priority must be given to the children and the sick, she declared, her authority unquestioned despite her youth. Each family with children under 12 will receive 1 portion. The remaining supplies will be distributed to the elderly and pregnant women. Adrian Moreau, a former schoolteacher, raised a cautionary hand. We must be extremely careful. If the Germans discover these supplies, the consequences will be severe. Marie nodded. The distribution will occur tonight, after curfew. Each family will be instructed to consume the evidence immediately or conceal it where it cannot be found during searches. That night, under cover of darkness, 12 families received vital supplies that would sustain their most vulnerable members for the coming week. The effect was immediate. Children who had been listless with hunger showed renewed energy, and a pregnant woman who had been concerning her midwife began to regain her strength. Marie kept detailed records of the distribution and carefully observed its effects, instinctively understanding that this information might somehow be useful to their American benefactor, should he return. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Harrington completed 2 additional drops in neighboring areas over the following week, unaware of the precise impact, but hoping the supplies were reaching those most in need. Upon returning from the third mission, he was summoned to Air Commodore Hamilton's office. "Sit down, Lieutenant," Hamilton said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I've received some rather interesting intelligence from our resistance networks in Normandy." Harrington's pulse quickened. Had something gone wrong? Had the Germans discovered the supplies? 3 villages in the Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray area have reported mysterious deliveries of food and medical supplies, Hamilton continued. "Interestingly, these deliveries correspond exactly with your recent reconnaissance flights." "Sir, Hamilton raised a hand. "I'm not interested in official denials, Lieutenant. What interests me is this report." He slid a folder across the desk. "One of our resistance contacts has provided detailed information on supply distribution, effects on recipient health, and recommendations for future deliveries. Most remarkably, this report is accompanied by a request to thank the American pilot with the St. Christopher Medallion." Harrington remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the implied connection. "It seems, Lieutenant, that your Operation Provision has independently evolved into something resembling a coordinated relief effort on the ground. The resistance network has organized distribution systems, medical monitoring, and security protocols, all without any direct communication from our side." "That would be a fortunate development, sir." Hamilton leaned forward. "Indeed, so fortunate that I've recommended the immediate expansion of the operation to include 20 additional villages in the region, with twice-weekly drops until the invasion commences." Harrington could scarcely believe what he was hearing. "Sir, that would require significant additional resources and personnel." "Already approved, Lieutenant. You'll be promoted to captain, effective immediately, and given operational command of a specialized squadron tasked with conducting these missions in conjunction with standard reconnaissance operations." The next 3 weeks saw the rapid expansion of Operation Provision. Under Harrington's direction, 14 pilots were trained in low-altitude supply drops. Specialized containers were developed that could be mistaken for French agricultural packages if discovered, and intelligence networks were leveraged to identify communities in greatest need. What began as one man's compassionate response to a desperate mother's plea had evolved into a significant humanitarian operation that delivered over 60,000 pounds of concentrated food and medical supplies to French villages in the pre-invasion period. On the ground, Marie-Laurent emerged as a natural coordinator, developing efficient distribution systems that ensured supplies reached those most in need, while minimizing the risk of German discovery. Her background as the wife of a resistance member gave her the necessary caution, while her compassion as a mother drove her determination. Through a carefully established communication channel via resistance networks, Marie provided regular updates on community needs and the effectiveness of different supply types. Her reports, transmitted through 3 intermediaries before reaching Allied intelligence, became instrumental in refining Operation Provision's approach. "The powdered milk has been particularly valuable for infants and young children," she wrote in one such report. "However, we require more medical supplies, particularly antibiotics for respiratory infections that have become prevalent. Distribution at night has proven effective in avoiding detection, though we recommend varying drop times to prevent pattern recognition by German patrols." The operation's success remained its secrecy. German authorities noticed the improved health of children in certain villages, but attributed it to black market activities rather than Allied intervention. Several investigations were launched, but the carefully designed packaging and distribution systems left no evidence of military involvement. As the date for the Normandy invasion approached, Operation Provision faced a critical decision point. Military resources would soon be fully committed to combat operations, potentially ending the humanitarian drops at the moment when civilian need might become most acute due to increased fighting. Captain Harrington, now commanding a squadron of 16 aircraft dedicated to combined reconnaissance and humanitarian missions, proposed a transition plan. Operation Provision should be integrated into post-invasion civil affairs operations, he argued in a meeting with senior command staff. The distribution networks and trust relationships established through these drops will be invaluable during liberation. Air Commodore Hamilton supported this recommendation. The French civilian infrastructure established through Operation Provision, represents a strategic asset beyond its humanitarian value. These networks can facilitate rapid stabilization of liberated areas and provide critical intelligence during the advance. Approval was granted for a modified continuation of the operation during the initial phases of the invasion, with gradual transition to formal civil affairs units as territories were secured. On June 5, 1944, the evening before D-Day, Captain Harrington led a final pre-invasion supply drop to 6 villages near Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray. Included with the standard supplies were coded messages alerting resistance networks to the imminent invasion and providing basic instructions for civilian safety. As his aircraft passed over the original drop zone near Marie-Laurent's village, Harrington permitted himself a moment of reflection. What had begun as a single act of compassion had expanded into an operation that saved countless lives and created infrastructure that would help rebuild France after liberation. He could not know that in the small cottage below, Marie-Laurent was gathering her children and neighbors, distributing the latest supplies while sharing her conviction that liberation was near. "The Americans have not forgotten us," she told them, her voice strong despite her still thin frame. "They come not just as liberators of our country, but as saviors of our children. When they arrive, they will find not a defeated people, but a community ready to rebuild." In the chaotic weeks following the D-Day landings, the full impact of Operation Provision became clear. Villages that had benefited from the supply drops demonstrated significantly higher survival rates during the fighting, more effective evacuation procedures, and more rapid recovery once German forces retreated. More importantly, these communities provided invaluable support to advancing Allied forces, offering intelligence on German positions, safe houses for military personnel, and volunteer assistance for civil affairs units tasked with restoring essential services. By mid-July, as the Normandy campaign progressed, formal humanitarian operations supplanted the clandestine supply drops. Captain Harrington, having completed 48 Operation Provision missions, was reassigned to air support operations for advancing ground forces. Before departing for his new assignment, he received an intelligence briefing that included an update on Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray, now under Allied control. The report mentioned a local French civilian who had been instrumental in organizing community support for advancing American forces, Marie-Laurent, who had apparently recognized the distinctive St. Christopher medallion worn by American platoon leader and immediately offered her villages complete cooperation. 3 months later, in October 1944, Captain Harrington received permission for a brief detour during a transport mission. Landing at a small airfield near the now liberated Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray, he arranged transportation to the village. The transformation was remarkable. Though still bearing the scars of occupation and battle, the community showed signs of recovery. Children played in the streets, thin still, but energetic and healthy compared to the conditions he had witnessed in May. At the small village square, now serving as a distribution center for official relief supplies, Harrington inquired about Marie-Laurent. He was directed to a modest cottage at the village edge, where he found her organizing a community meal program. The recognition was immediate and emotional. "It is you, the pilot," she exclaimed, momentarily forgetting the professional distance she maintained as the village's recovery coordinator. "You came back. I promised I would remember your village, Madame Laurent," he replied, smiling. For the first time, they were able to speak openly, sharing the full story of what each had done in the months since their brief encounter in the field. Marie explained how she had organized the distribution network, keeping detailed records of each family's needs and documenting the health improvements to send back through resistance channels. "We knew the food was coming from someone who had seen our suffering firsthand," she explained. "Each package seemed designed for our specific needs. The children began calling you l'ange américain, the American angel." Harrington laughed. "Hardly an angel, madame. Just a pilot who couldn't ignore hungry children. A decision that saved many lives, Captain, not just from hunger but during the fighting as well. Your supplies gave us strength to evacuate when necessary and to help your soldiers when they arrived." As they talked, Marie's children returned from the community school that had recently reopened. Little Claudette, no longer gaunt and sickly, ran to her mother with a drawing in hand. "Maman, maman, I made a picture of an airplane bringing food." Marie introduced the children to Harrington. "This is the American pilot I told you about, the one who brought the first food when we were so hungry." The children stared in awe as if meeting a character from a fairy tale come to life. 8-year-old Emily stepped forward solemnly. "Merci. Monsieur," she said in careful English, "you saved my sister. The doctor said she would have died without the medicine you brought." Harrington knelt to the child's level. "Your mother is the real hero. She made sure everyone received what they needed." Before departing, Harrington presented Marie with official documentation, recognizing her role in Operation Provision and authorizing priority status for her village in ongoing reconstruction efforts. What he did not mention was his personal recommendation that had expedited this status. "Will you return again, Captain?" Marie asked as he prepared to leave. "Perhaps someday, when the war is over," he replied. "I would like to see how the village has recovered. You will always be welcome here. My home is your home." As Captain Harrington departed Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray that afternoon, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a chance encounter and a desperate plea for help. What might have remained a small, personal act of compassion had evolved into an operation that not only saved lives, but created infrastructure that would help rebuild France. More significantly, it demonstrated how individual choices, even in wartime, could transcend military objectives to affirm shared humanity. The official records of Operation Provision would eventually document the tonnage of supplies delivered, the number of communities served, and its contribution to civil-military cooperation during the liberation of France. What those records could not capture was the moment when a starving mother begged an enemy pilot for food, and instead of following protocol, he chose compassion. A choice that would inspire others to do the same, creating ripples of humanity in warfare's harsh landscape. In the years following the war, Thomas Harrington returned to civilian life, rarely speaking of his wartime experiences. Yet he maintained correspondence with Marie Laurent, whose village had become a model for post-war recovery due to the community organization developed during Operation Provision. In 1954, exactly 10 years after their first encounter, Harrington returned to Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray for the dedication of a small memorial in the village square, not celebrating military victory, but commemorating the humanitarian bridge between allies and civilians that had sustained the community through its darkest days. The memorial, a simple stone tablet with inscriptions in both French and English, bore no names or official insignia, just as the original supply packages had carried no identifying marks. Yet every villager knew the story it represented, and how a desperate plea and a compassionate response had grown into something that transformed not just their community, but the very concept of military humanitarian operations. The official military history would record Operation Provision as an innovative civil-military initiative that delivered over 300,000 pounds of supplies to 87 French communities in the pre-invasion and early liberation periods. Intelligence assessments would credit it with significantly increasing civilian cooperation and accelerating post-liberation recovery in the affected regions. What no official document could capture was the profound truth that Marie Laurent expressed during the memorial dedication. In the darkest times when survival itself seemed impossible, we learned that humanity can prevail even in war's shadow. One act of compassion became many, and many became a bridge that carried us to liberation, not just of our country, but of our hope. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.